All right, welcome back, everybody. Here we are again for part two of Tapatío 2 Electric Boogaloo, and Peyton shakes his head at that every time because he
I
doesn't know what it's a
literally every
reference to.
time. You won't catch me not shaking my head.
It's okay. I understand. You're younger than me. That's why it's an intergenerational humor. There's a gap here.
There is quite a gap. What have we got? 2 years?
It's a reference. I'll let you Google it. No, I'm kidding. I think we differ by a year, so that's a little pretentious of me. But anyway, yeah, really happy to be putting on a second part episode with this one. I think it was just so like dense, not in terms of information necessarily, but it's just experiences. And I think that it was really smart of us to kind of break this one up because Tapatío was really vulnerable in talking about his journey through his first 4 months of ownership. And granted, like this is still very new. I mean, this is very nascent. Like this practice has not. It's in the so-called honeymoon phase, which is, I think, something Tapatío kind of denied to a degree. But it still is. He's dealing with the existing patient base and trying to acculturate and trying to get these things working. And so, like this is the period of time where you're kind of flying blind a little bit, especially with the practice been working on paper charts and has had this kind of culture. Like you don't exactly know what you're working with yet. And I think it's going to take some time for these numbers to really shake out. But just hearing about how him and his wife have been able to incorporate themselves into the practice and get things rolling, I feel really optimistic about their ability to really capitalize on this opportunity. Do you feel that same way, Peyton?
Yeah. They're definitely moving in the right direction. That is for sure. I just had a couple things that I wanted to touch on. First, I know you brought up how with the honeymoon phase, he didn't really feel like he was experiencing as much of that as he would have anticipated. And at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to a capacity issue. His practice has a ton of patients, but he just doesn't have enough time to see them all, which is, don't get me wrong, that's an incredible problem to have. But I think that might be one of the reasons why he isn't seeing that as much as he would have expected. And then secondly, just along the lines of getting vulnerable, it's so cool to hear him say that a lot of the fears that he was thinking about and that we're thinking were going to be, happening to him before ownership really aren't much of an issue now, or a lot of them are muted to where he doesn't notice them nearly as much as he did before. And I just think it's really important that he brought that up. That's a lot of, I feel like that's something that a lot of people, don't like to talk about. It's definitely something that's very vulnerable. So it was good to hear him share that with us today.
Yeah, for sure. I'll address both points on that. And obviously this is an intro, so I'm not going to go too far into it. But I think that on the first part, when you say that, capacity is a good problem to have, I mean, you're absolutely right. And, thinking back to where my head was at when we first interviewed Tapatío, I did not think that that's what he was going to run into. I didn't think that that was really going to be the problem. And granted, like it's a good problem to have, but he's got this issue of like, when am I going to be able to bring on a new associate? How do I bring on a new hygienist? How do we expand hours? Like, how do I expand this capacity so we can deal with this flow of patients that we're dealing with? And, that is a question that comes along with regards to growing practices. And, this is the sort of challenge that you want to have when you're buying a practice that still has growth potential. I think a lot of times whenever we look at opportunities that are, higher debt, larger acquisitions like this one was, sometimes they can be like really maxed out. If you have like one doc in there and they're super producers and you got a hygiene percentage that's like 19% as opposed to 36%, you'll walk in there and there's not all this growth opportunity. There's not a capacity issue, or rather there is a capacity issue, but you're on the other end of the spectrum in that you have maxed out everything you can really do with this practice. And there's like nothing really for you to add. And so it's not, a means of trying to catch up and allow yourself to get your head above water. It's like, you're too far above water and,
you're floating.
Yeah. And we might be carrying that analogy a little bit too far, but, I think I agree with you on it being a good problem to have. And, in terms of the fears that you mentioned, I'll talk a little bit more about in the outro and kind of let, Tapatío speak for himself on that one. But, I totally agree. And I think that I really want people to kind of listen for it because, the fears that Tapatío had were so typical. And I think that everyone that comes upon an opportunity, no matter how good it looks or how bad it looks, are going to be having the same fears. And so it's just going to be really interesting as you listen through this episode to see how all that panned out, because he kind of goes through it item by item and, kind of catches us up 4 months later. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I have a new lens to see that sort of fear through. So it's really interesting. So without any further ado, I'll let Tapatío take it away. You did make the point about, making changes with the staff early on, and people generally advise not to do that. But it sounds to me a little bit like, you said the front desk quit pretty early on, right?
He quit the week before we took over, which was a blessing because based on what the other staff said, he was kind of a pain in the,
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of things to be coming his way with the transition and everything. So I think getting a new person in there that kind of was able to, walk on coals might have been a benefit to you. Right.
Yeah. So that was interesting for sure.
Yeah. And I feel like, with you guys coming in and, you said you had people coming in on the weekends and, you're having to pay overtime and everything. And a lot of things were changing really fast for these people that, had been probably in the practice for some time. I almost feel that, if you had sort of tried to keep things static for a while, you would have given them the impression that things were going to be more or less the same. And then you would be trying to implement changes later. And then all of a sudden they're having to overturn those expectations that they had already created. And so I think that, with all the things that need to be done, I think it was actually appropriate that you went ahead and just got on top of it right from the beginning. And, through that, you kind of learn what kind of team you have and whether or not they're going to be able to weather the changes that come in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It showcases who's willing to change and who's not. And thankfully, I think invariably almost everyone is really open to change. So, the running joke is, okay, I'm not going to change anything anymore. I think we're in a good spot because we have changed so much. We even had to change like the pay structure for hygiene because some of them were getting paid. I'm in a state where you have to pay hygienists hourly.
Okay.
And so they were not getting paid hourly. And so we had to switch them to a different pay structure. And so now there's, they had to accept that and it's just different.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's required to pay hourly.
Yes. In our state, I don't know if if the state will be said, but yeah, in our state, it's a little bit different. Hygienists they're non-exempt, so they have to be paid hourly.
Right. So
which means, we really have to watch the clock, right? Because if a hygienist gets paid overtime, it's a lot more expensive than an assistant. And so it's just, this goes back to the HR stuff.
Yeah. That's interesting. So I think you alluded to it earlier. You were kind of comparing, the challenges that you thought you were going to have going into it. And it seems like a lot more of it is just kind of falling on your ability and Ms. Tapatío's ability to be leaders and to implement changes and just handle that team and just kind of try to keep that boat afloat with everything going on. Is that kind of lining up with how things went down?
Yeah, definitely. Things like increasing production, finding treatment to do and getting patients in, that's all pretty I would say simple stuff, right? It's like a checklist, like show them a picture, talk to them, as long as you have some personable skills. But when it comes to managing the staff, the hard thing is you have to be consistent, right? And I've always thought of myself as a very a likable person. But it wasn't until I was put in the boss leadership position that I realized, being a likable person sometimes can come as a weakness because you want to be everybody's friend, right? And so you have to figure out, okay, well, how do I toe that line? And so, I feel lucky that I have Ms. Tapatío because she's better about being consistent with enforcing things, right? Because I want to just be everyone's friend, right?
Okay. So you guys gonna have a good cop, bad cop kind of thing going on.
Right, but she doesn't want to be the bad cop, so I get to be the bad cop too.
Okay.
So it's definitely a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. It's I like that you say that, things about, getting patients in and increasing production and case acceptance, all that, that's where most dentists focus really are in that sort of internal growth, that sort of doctor based growth, teach me how to perform my job better and do more. That's where, most dental CE is at. That's where people are really trying to, that's where people are seeing their gaps at. Like the gap between where I'm at and where I want to be is bridged by more production, getting more patients in, marketing, producing more, et cetera, et cetera. And you're kind of saying that, at least in your position with regards to the acquisition, most of the gaps have really just been in leadership and HR and just like dealing with these sort of day-to-day issues that come along with implementing changes with an existing team. Yeah, and I think that's just a really interesting point. And I know that, when we talked to you last time, you kind of said that you were pretty comfortable and passionate about dentistry. How has dealing with all these issues, like, has that affected your ability to enjoy dentistry? Has that affected, what you're getting out of it at all?
Yeah, so I would say in the beginning, just like everyone says, right? It's like it's pretty stressful. It's definitely gotten easier, and it's just stressful because you don't know what challenges the day are going to hold. For me, clinically, that's really not the stressful part because such and such happens. We know what to do. If something doesn't go well, it's all about patient communication, right?
Right.
But the people part of it is just kind of unpredictable to me. And so you have to I guess you just have to get used to the unpredictableness of it. And being sure of yourself and making a decision right there on the spot. Because if you delay, it just makes it worse usually.
That's interesting. Yeah. So to speak to some of the fears that you had, when last we spoke, were any of those fears true? Did any of them become resolved? Did any of them kind of amplify? Like, how do you reflect on the way that you felt back then?
Yeah, all those, I don't think any of the fears came to fruition, which is kind of funny because the practice, like I couldn't have imagined that the two doctors weren't speaking to each other, right?
I don't think anyone did.
Yeah. I mean, if you had told me that in the beginning, I would have thought, oh my gosh, like
freaked out.
There's so much turmoil, the patients are going to leave. But honestly, the patients are really receptive. I think most patients are going to be pretty receptive to, as long as they like the current doctor and aren't looking for a reason to leave, right? They're going to be pretty receptive to a new face. And you just have to, I think the big thing is like getting the staff on board as well. And so, if the hygienist like you, they're going to ask the hygienist about you before they actually talk to you. So as long as they can build like positive rapport with you, you're not going to lose the patients. I think that was like my big fear, right? Are you going to be able to reproduce what the current doctor did? I mean, you just have to be realistic with yourself. The procedures that they're doing can you do? And, we took over a practice that was doing bread and butter dentistry. So, invariably our production, it's going to be similar. So.
Yeah, I think that if I recall correctly, it was at about a 36% hygiene production. And, we said something along the lines of, you're going to be able to increase that production pretty much overnight because, you're kind of like a driven dentist. Do you think that that's kind of, followed for the most part, that you've, been able to reproduce things and diagnose more and et cetera?
I would say, I don't know. I mean, it's pretty early on. We're 4 months into it.
It's hard to tell. Yeah.
Our first month was great. Our December was really awesome. And then January was kind of slow. This month is picking back up again. I don't know how much of that to blame on COVID. And, I mean, that's probably everyone's scapegoat, right? Oh, I'm not doing well because of COVID.
Right. Yeah.
And there's the decrease in Delta fees, but I think in the long run, I think definitely we're going to be able to outproduce what they did. I think one of the pros, and so the one of the docs, the male doctor, the senior doctor, he was very conservative, and so he would like patch crowns, and things like that, right? And so I go in there and he just saw the patient 6 months ago, and I tell them, okay, you need a crown or whatnot, or 2 crowns. It's a hard sell, right? Or every patient's got like three huge amalgams with cracks everywhere. Yeah. And so how are you going to bring up that discussion, right? So I've kind of taken the course of, like, I know George says that the first 6 months you're going to have the honeymoon where you increase production because you're diagnosing more. But I don't think our practice is going to have that because we've kind of taken the stance like, let's be a little more conservative in the beginning. And then when we see this patient again in 6 months or whatever it may be, then they're really going to be our patient, and then we can diagnose how we want. That may be wrong, I don't know, but that's just kind of the approach we've taken on that. So
yeah, and I think the thing is too is you said you guys are kind of running into a capacity issue, so even if you want to do more, it's kind of tough when you don't have any more space to do that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to really increase their production, I think we're gonna have to get into like more nuanced things, like bringing in like specialty type procedures and that kind of a thing, right? Because you can only do so many delta crowns in one day.
Or class twos.
Yeah. The nice thing about having an older patient population is you don't do a lot of fillings. It's a lot of crowns.
That is a good sign. That is good.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so it sounds like overall, like everything's going pretty well. I know you said it's still relatively fresh, but you are actually a member of the owner mastermind as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so I guess if you wouldn't mind just kind of going through how that has changed your ownership experience so far and kind of what you've gotten out of it since you've been in it.
Well, I think the good thing is it's good to see that other people are going through similar things because we're all new owners, right? And so we have similar problems. And then you get to get feedback and advice from people who are like-minded and have similar goals. Because I find when you're on other like really large Facebook groups, you're getting like 100 different opinions from doctors who you have no idea what their goals are or what their credentials are.
Yeah.
And so you take it with a grain of salt. And I remember prior to practice ownership, I had this like angst trying to find all the information I could. Like I was going to find like this special piece of information that was going to like tell me how to find the right practice and be successful. But now that I have a practice, right. I'm like always like on the Facebook groups, right? Trying to like learn as much as possible.
Yeah. Which group has all the answers? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And you're like, oh, can I trust this person? Is that good advice?
Right.
And so, now, we're, I don't feel the need to do that because I'm with all these people who are doing the things that I want to do, or we're on that same path together. And so it's nice. Yeah. And there's the coaches too, to help, when another member doesn't have all the answers, and they give more positive feedback and things like that. So I think it helps a lot.
Right. And like ultimately, the context of everything and what it is they're trying to do and what problems they're specifically addressing. And you're able to more easily, coordinate that with what you're trying to do. So I think that's awesome. I think you're a super valuable member of that group. And, I see you in the Slack channels and stuff and, talking about what you're working through. And I really appreciate your vulnerability with all that. So, one thing I am curious about, so we've kind of caught up from, last July to now, and we kind of know about a lot of the challenges that you've had. So I'm curious about, what are the goals now? Where do we see this practice going? And do we have a plan on how we're going to get there?
Yeah, I think, for us, the one thing is, like I said, the capacity issue. So bringing those patients back in to meet us before they disappear. And then from there, it's just building the systems in place to take care of this capacity. So, we're going to have to hire more people. We're looking for another front desk right now and another assistant, so that we can bring on that capacity. And then, once we get our AR under control, then it's a matter of, bringing in like a CBCT so I can start doing implants, and invariably, bringing in advertising so that, we can get a newer patient base. And then we start checking off all those boxes, right? Doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing. And fixing the systems and creating the systems along the way to keep that machine running. And then, as you see fit in the future, bring down associate or tapering down, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, of all problems that you can have as a new owner, like running into a capacity issue this soon, that's definitely an awesome problem to have. And, you really haven't, added a whole lot of new patients. You haven't done anything to really turn a whole lot of knobs, and you're already, kind of hitting that ceiling. So, I'm assuming, for you, it's just kind of moving forward and figuring out, okay, like, what can I do to increase capacity, and what's that going to look like?
Yeah, no, I feel like we've been super fortunate. The doctor that we bought the practice from, he built a great practice with a great reputation. that's something that you can't glean from like a prospectus, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he had like 5 Google reviews. I mean,
really,
but the patients, like, and everyone in town love him. He's very popular. So it's
kind of people that
it's hard.
reviews.
Yeah, right. I mean, so it's hard to tell, but yeah, I mean, I would say we feel very fortunate to have gotten this practice, and like I said, it's kind of funny looking back on all the fears that were had. And as I think you said, Tyler, at the end of last episode, I'm definitely eating crow.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's awesome. I am curious, like, so we kind of talk. I don't know when we've talked about it last, but we may have even talked about it on your part 1 episode. So we kind of talked about that sort of state of fear that we continue to be in, and we get inspired by different things to be afraid of different things. Like, do you still feel like that sense of fear or impending sense of doom or failure, and it's just kind of like changed, what it is you're concerned about? Or like, do you feel like you've grown or more confident as a person and you're more willing to accept certain risks, or, how that feeling, like, are you able to, do you have like a new context for that feeling in your life? Like, what's kind of changed around that?
Yeah, I definitely feel like the fear has, I mean, you still have the stress, right? You still have, I mean, human nature, you're going to have that fear, but I definitely feel like it's definitely not what it used to be. Um, you taking the leap into becoming a business owner specifically, you realize how much control you have and how different it is versus being an employee. Because, as an employee, you have no control. And as an owner, you have so much more control and control over what happens in the future. So that fear kind of goes away. And I think for all businesses, I mean, as long as you have certain positive characteristics, I think you're going to do well. Not to sound like too optimistic, but there's enough. I think there's enough people out there who aren't doing things right, that as long as you do most of them right, you're probably going to be okay.
You know
what I mean?
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I actually just talked to a local supply rep here recently, and he's like, I mean, yeah, there's a ton of dentists here, but there's also a lot of dentists that just aren't very good. And if you can come in and be a competent business person, a competent owner, give people the services they want and do it in a way that is good for them, then you're going to do well. And it sounds like that's what you're doing here.
Yeah, I mean, people, they just want to be cared for, right? I mean, everyone has heard that joke in dental school, right? Where like, the dentist that has poor workmanship, but the patients like him does better than the dentist that has like amazing preps, right? And I don't mean like you should go and have crappy preps, but your relationship with your patients is definitely one of the more important things. And that goes into your relationship with your staff and as well. So
yeah, for sure. Was that anything that kind of presented a challenge? I mean, I know you said that they were pretty welcoming of a new face. I mean, in navigating, I think one thing you said was that Miss Tapatío was going to see the patients that were seeing the woman,
yes.
and you were going to see the patients that were seeing the men. Was that the way it went, and how did that go?
Yeah, that's pretty much what we've done, and it's worked out pretty well. Okay, I would say, I mean, we've gotten maybe like a handful of patients that after they've met a certain doctor say, okay, I want to stay with this doctor. But for the most part, it's worked out pretty well. That the patients that you meet, they seem to take a liking to you pretty quickly. So
yeah, and I mean that, and I think that too, like, when you have aspirations of having this sort of group practice that you have, I mean, there's likely going to be some turnover here and there. Like, you might have an associate that comes in and maybe it doesn't work out and they move on and someone else comes in, and maybe at some point in the future, you and Miss Tapatío kind of start phasing each other out, and you want to bring on more associates and kind of, be more removed from the practice. And at some point you do kind of have to have your patients accustomed to seeing fresh faces. And I think a lot of times we find out that people aren't quite as discriminating about that as we kind of expect them to be. The patients don't just fly the coop when you do that, and maybe that's it has to do with this being a more rural practice, and people don't necessarily aren't going to go they're used to going to that location, and that's what they, are going to stick with even when new people come in. I don't know. I'm not sure, but I think about that are usually a little exaggerated.
I mean, I know George talks about hygienists being plug and play, but one thing I've noticed, and patients have said it over and over again, is that they are very attached to their hygienists.
Oh, they matter way more than we do. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, one of the hygienists, she was working in a different practice, which was bought by another young doctor, and I guess it didn't work out. So she left and came to the practice that we have now.
Mm-hmm.
And she brought with her so many patients. And
really,
and I won't even say anything. And patients will be very upfront and say, if so and so leaves, I'm following them. And so these patients they're way more attached to their hygienist than they are to me, right? So I mean, I think maybe when you're in a bigger city, people maybe they don't have that. Maybe they have less of that personal connection. I don't know, but they definitely are very clear that they have way more loyalty to the hygienist than they do to me.
Okay, so it is a valid concern, but people are considering themselves way more important than they actually are, and it's really more about the hygienists.
So keep your, if you can, keep them somewhat happy.
For sure. Well, yeah, that's a great. I think we've had a lot of really good points to bring away from this, and I gotta say I'm super proud of you and Miss Tapatío for the 5, or I guess it's been 5 months now, roughly.
4 months.
Yeah, 4 months. Of bravery and perseverance that you've had, and going to this opportunity that we all said was a slam dunk, and I think it still is, but it's just it's had growing pains, and it's had some things that we didn't necessarily anticipate, but I think you guys have weathered it really well, and things tracking beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, if you would have told me, like I said in the beginning, that we would have had this Delta issue, this conversion issue, walked into a practice where people weren't speaking to each other. I mean, I would have been like that. That sounds like a cough, Kafkaesque type nightmare.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it'll probably be okay. Dennis, there's a reason I think that banks will write us a big check. I mean,
right.
Me and Mrs. Tapatío, we have no prior business experience. And the bank, loaned us over $1 million in the middle of a once in a century pandemic, right? I mean, so that's like a testament,
right,
to the bank's trust in dentistry. I think that's a pretty good sign.
Yeah, for sure. And I really can't wait to have you guys. I say you guys as if it's you and Miss Tapatío, which, by the way, she's more than welcome to come on the show if she'd ever like to. But I'd be happy to have you guys or you on in the future to kind of check up and see how things are going, because I think that you're getting to a point of critical mass where there's a flow state to come where you guys' practice is chiming along a lot more like how you envision it to, and for now you're kind of shaking the old bones that were kind of there, and trying to get everything going. So I'm really excited to see how this turns out for you guys, and I'm optimistic for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to just the future. I mean, we had a meeting with our CPA, and you just to see the numbers and like our future trajectory and how soon he thinks that we can like retire, it's pretty amazing. I mean,
really awesome.
We left a pretty amazing associate job, so and it's still better than that. So
that's good. That's awesome.
So I would say practice ownership. It has its headaches, and I mean we're working a lot more hours than we used to, but we're in the growing pains, right? We're building systems, and eventually it's really going to pay dividends.
Yeah, for sure. Peyton?
It's just cool to see people, on the other side that are just really killing it and really doing a good job. And it seems like that's what you guys are doing here. Also, I've had this burning question the whole episode. Is Tapatío your favorite hot sauce? Or it's just really been bothering me. I need to know.
Honestly, I like Cholula more.
Oh,
what? Oh my gosh, these episodes have been a lie.
But it's an old college nickname. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
I can't go any further than that.
Of course.
Yeah, this is a PG show, so Richard
Yeah.
approve.
Hey, I didn't want to get us too off track. I was really burning. I feel like someone else had to have that.
Jeez. You just threw us into controversy. You made a whole issue with it now. Oh man. Well, Tapatío, I'd really like to close with, we've obviously gone through all kinds of cautionary things for our listeners and everything, but if you would have anything succinct to tell our pre-owners, people that are looking to buy practices that have some of the fears that you had, as they were obviously very common, is there anything you just kind of like to leave them with?
Yeah, I mean, just ask yourself, the fears that you're having, are they like fluke, once in a lifetime fears, or are they fears that are real examples that happen all the time, right? I mean, like my fear was that everyone's going to leave and I can't reproduce what the other doc was doing. And ask yourself, does that really happen? I mean, I haven't really heard of that happening, right?
No, not really.
And lean on your professionals. That's why you pay them. And just go forward based on those numbers, and look for the positives, and don't be too afraid of red flags, because like Peyton said, you can always find a red flag no matter what, right? I mean, I was finding red flags in this amazing practice, and so maybe write them down, and because it's easy for something negative in our minds to just stick there and cloud our judgment. And so really critically think about what the actual picture looks like before you make a decision.
Yeah, I really like that, because I think that if somewhere at the bottom of all your fears you are hoping to find a reason to not go through with it, you're going to find it. If you're looking for red flags, you'll find them. And I think that's just a really wonderful point. And, if you'd really listened to those and played to those basal fears, you wouldn't be in the position you are now, and you wouldn't have the trajectory that your CPA is telling you about. So, I think that's a really wonderful note to end on, and I'm really glad you shared that. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah. I'm glad I could help everyone.
For sure. So, Tapatío, and also to Miss Tapatío, thank you so much for being willing to share your story. And we hope to have you on again. And I hope the listeners all enjoyed it. And I'm sure I'll be getting some messages from them about your experience and wanting to know more about how they can be like the Tapatíos.
I will be excited once we have AR under control, and I can pay myself a very nice salary.
Positive note here. Come on. You got
What's that?
We're trying to end on a positive note here.
Oh, I know. Well, I guess that's a problem I still need to work on, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, no, we'll definitely be checking on that. $250,000. That's just kind of hanging out. And
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll definitely wait at least until you've paid yourselves to have you back on. I think that's kind of a prerequisite. I can't have another update episode if you're not paying.
I think our CPA said we actually get paid tomorrow. So.
Okay, so we'll have you on tomorrow. We can just do same time.
Yeah,
and we'll kind of get an update on how optimistic you are after that.
It'll get better.
For sure, man. Well, again, thank you so much for being on, and I look forward to the next time we talk.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
That does it for Tapatío 2 Electric Boogaloo, and that's the last time I'm ever going to say that. I apologize both to the audience and Peyton for as many times as I have run into the ground.
Yeah, you need to apologize to me for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's done. Yeah, man, I really love this episode. I did, and I can't wait for the next one. I know I'm saying that prematurely, but just to get this idea of the trajectory that I think this practice has, and the potential that I know Tapatío and Miss Tapatío have here, I am just so excited to see where this goes. And I think that we touched on so many great things, because I guess probably 80% of all the work that we've done with the pursuit of ownership is about pre-ownership. It's about just getting to the point where you buy the practice. And sometimes we talk about what can happen afterward if, you agree to such terms, or the practice looks like this or whatever. But we so rarely talk to people that have just purchased a practice and get to see, what the before and after was like. And I think that, Tapatío mentioned that, he'll get a little bit more into the nitty gritty details and the numbers of how the practice is working out the next time we have him on. But he really just got so personal about the experience of ownership and the experience of walking into an opportunity like this. And Peyton, you mentioned fear earlier before. And I think that one thing that became very clear for me is that, fear is the ever present thing. It's our ability to imagine the worst case scenario. And I think that with the type of people the dentists tend to be, we're very adept at doing that. But what we find out is that as we kind of go through life, we always have that fear, and we're sort of justifying that feeling of fear with these just imaginary scenarios. And in this particular case, we see how literally none of those scenarios are really accurate. There was actually a whole nother host of scenarios that he had to be afraid of that he just wasn't even aware of.
The so sticky notes.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Like, if you want to be afraid of something, be afraid of that, right? And I guess that's what fear of unknown is, right? But, it was none of the concocted fears were actually what ended up being in his way. It was totally different ones. And so it's like you can spend all this time preparing for the fears that you anticipate. And in reality, none of those may be valid. You may have totally different fears. So really, like, what are you even going to be able to prepare for, right? And it's so much more about just being mind ready for the things that you don't know are going to happen, and keeping your eyes on the prize. And the mission is the vision. And, just having that in mind and being so dedicated to it. And I think that's what Miss Tapatío exemplified wonderfully. And so I just think it's a great point to have in mind. Listeners to the show, we're all in different places in our career, and we have different anticipations about the things that are going to give us trouble and the things that are going to, really challenge us. And a lot of times those things don't really pan out to be what we're afraid of, but the fear and the experience of it always seems the same. Right. So that was the thoughts I was alluding to earlier. Did you have any thing along those lines, Baden?
Yeah. I think everything you said there were all fantastic points. I think the thing too, with getting into ownership, and this is kind of along the lines of what you were saying, is you don't need to get into ownership knowing how to do everything. You just need to be able to problem solve your way through things. And you just need to be able to know how to get the answer. And I think that's kind of what he's realized as he's gotten into ownership, is he doesn't need to know everything, but he needs to be able to problem solve, critically think, and get to the solution that'll, help him solve whatever problem he's facing. And I think that's what he's been doing. So it seems to be working well for him. Mm-hmm. Also, I really like the format of pre-owner before they buy a practice, relatively soon after purchase, and then maybe a follow-up like 6 months to a year later. I think that's super beneficial for everyone that's listening. And honestly, I'd be curious too, because they're all very different places in your journey, and a lot of change happens in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, no, I agree with this format, and I think we're going to keep running with it. We've been around for a year now, and I think we've interviewed enough people pre-ownership to where we're going to have a decent number of people to follow up on. And I think, having at least 2 follow-ups where we get sort of that first 6 months where you're just like trying to fix things, but not shake the boat too much. And you're having all this whole balance of like, how do I make this other person's practice mine? And then having the next 6 months, right? Like after that first sort of recall period where we're actually able to kind of get some analytics on it and put some numbers to what's going on, and like really understand like what has happened with this practice and where might we go. I think it's going to be fascinating. And to address your point about knowing how to get the answer, I agree with literally every word you said. I mean, it's more about the critical thinking and the ability to take on those challenges on the fly. That's really important. And my addendum to that is to have a support system as well that is either going through the exact same thing you're going through or something similar, or has gone through it in the past and has cautionary tales and things that they learned the hard way that they can, kind of save you some trouble on. And that's something that, certainly Tapatío and Miss Tapatío have a lot of like really great intrinsic qualities that make them wonderful leaders and practice owners. But they've also, to some extent, been helped by the shared practices mastermind and, all the other contacts that they have in their lives outside of shared practices or whatever, what have you, colleagues or family members or whatever. And it's the ability to be humble enough to, ask for help and talk about what's going, what you're dealing with, to help you ascertain like, what is that next step? What is my answer to this problem? It's not about knowing everything beforehand. Now, of granted, I am, and I think you are as well, a notorious over preparer. Like I study things long before the time comes along, in order to kind of equip myself for it. Right. Like I think the both of us were studying to, own dental practices before we actually started dental school. I specifically remember looking into it before I got into dental school, before I even thought I could. Right. So, I mean, there's still some validity and some credence to that practice, and I don't discourage anyone from doing it, but you always have to understand that you're never going to out prepare yourself from running into things like that day in and day out. Like that's literally what you're signing up for. And you have to, really acculturate yourself to discomfort and not always knowing the answer immediately, and just knowing how the process through which you arrive at that answer. And once you really nail that down, it doesn't really matter what problem gets thrown at you. And so that was a wonderful point that you made, Peyton. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's all about the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, audience, I really hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as you did the first time we had Tapatío on. He's just an excellent guest to have on. And, I'm glad that Miss Tapatío let him share some details of how everything's gone through. And, I can't wait to see how things are going the next time we have him back on. So I will be anxiously awaiting that along with all of you. So thanks so much for listening to this 2-part series of Tapatío. And no, I won't say the electric boogaloo thing again.
Gosh.
I screwed it up too. It's a tough thing to say. But anyway, thanks so much for listening to this series. We will be doing more like it because I'm pretty sure you guys are going to appreciate this style of things.